Hey everybody, hope you are looking forward to starting into a different corpus of literature in the New Testament. New Testament is a large corpus within which there are subcorpora. So Paul and his letters is what we've been focusing on exclusively so far, and you've probably felt like you're drinking out of a fire hydrant, lots of information in a short amount of time. And now we're moving on. So moving on to thinking of the so-called general epistles. This is another subcorpora of the New Testament. We'll also be, in light of that, changing our course reading to the Dictionary of the Later New Testament and its development. So DLNTD would be how you can refer to that in your assignments. And this week specifically we'll think about Hebrews and James. Hebrews is the first one to consider because a lot of people in the early church thought that Paul wrote it. They didn't really know what to do. It's an anonymous letter, and the vast weight of scholarship would say that Paul could not have written it for various reasons in the letter itself that you will read about in your reading for the week. But this book was included in some cases right after Paul's letters, which is why it comes here in the canon. So Hebrews and James. One thing that I like to do when I read any book is I'll have a pencil handy and I'll underline key words and ideas as I come across them. One of those ideas in Hebrews is the word better. If you just notice, you can actually read through Hebrews in one sitting. It'll take you about half an hour, maybe a little bit more. It was originally, scholars increasingly agree, it was originally a sermon. It's just put in letter form, and so it is truly meant to be heard in one sitting. And so if you read through it, you'll notice better, 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 better. Jesus is better than the angels. He's better than the high priestly system. He's better than all the rites of Judaism, which of course served their purpose and were very meaningful and important, but they were only a type and shadow of Christ who would come. So a beautiful book in the book of Hebrews. And then James is next, and James is, lots can be said about James. What's James's relationship to Paul? Paul says it's faith alone that justifies a man, and James says no, it's faith plus works. And so to what extent should we see them as in conversation? Some scholars say that he's responding to Paul's teaching and people who were abusing it. That's how some reconcile the two books. Some people would, more liberal scholars would say, no, they can't be reconciled. They're just divergent. And the situation of James, though, I think, for me, helps to reconcile these. And what I'm saying here is just the tip of the iceberg of the debate. But think of how early James could be. I think it's perhaps the earliest letter of the New Testament. Others disagree. Some others disagree. But until a certain point in the book of Acts, you'll notice that people aren't referred to as Christians who accept Christ. Until a certain point, in fact, they're only Jews who accept Christ. And so James, historically, the brother of Jesus, was known to have a fairly good relationship with Jews up until he was eventually martyred. And he would constantly be interceding for them and reasoning with them and teaching them. And so it seems likely that James is writing to a synagogue of people who wouldn't call themselves Christians because that word hasn't been invented yet. And as a result, of course, some of them have accepted Christ, but you notice that Christ is only mentioned at the very beginning of the letter and then in chapter 2, verse 1. And so it could be that he's writing to a group of Jews, some who are faithful to the covenant, who have accepted Messiah, some who have not. And in that sense, when you notice that when James talks about faith alone not justifying, notice that he doesn't talk about faith in Christ in context like Paul would. He talks about you believe that God is one. Even the demons believe and shudder. And that, the Shema, God is one, would have been one of the core confessions of faith for Jews. And James is saying that, yeah, faith alone does not justify. It's a faith that works that justifies. And of course, Paul would agree with that, but what he would say is that this new age of Christ, when you are justified by Christ, you have a faith that works. As we learn in Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit comes from that kind of faith. And so that's how I would reconcile those two authors. Other people would reconcile them differently, but that will be an important question to consider. As you think about your assignments for your discussion posts, thinking about angels in Hebrews, and thinking about Abraham in James. And as you think about Abraham and James, that will lead you naturally, hopefully, into your essay for the week, which is to think of Old Testament figures in the book of James. So be thinking about every figure, and by figure we mean people. Sometimes that's misunderstood. Be thinking about every person mentioned by James, and try to see if there's some consistency in how he uses them. Maybe there's one main way that he uses them. Maybe there's a couple of ways. Try to bring some synthesis to that in your paper, and that's what I'll be looking for as I grade those. And hope you enjoy these two great books.